This section, before we actually dive into how to create your own podcast guest form, I kind of wanted to just take you behind the scenes and show you my podcast guest form. So this is the form that gets sent out to every single guest who comes onto my show, and they do not come onto the show until this is figured out. So, or filled out, I should say. So I wanted to take you behind the scenes here just to see what I've got, and then you can see what may or may not work for you. And if you're kind of wondering how do I put all this together, don't worry, there's going to be a tutorial on how to put a form like this together. But like I said, I just wanted to show you mine to begin with so you can see what you are working to achieve here. So first of all, it's just called the podcast guest form. And I explain that it has to be completed before being interviewed for the podcast, and I name the podcast as well. Particularly, I just think that sometimes people are so busy, and there are some people who, well, actually, most of the guests that come on my show who are ridiculously busy people. So I just want either them or their VA, whoever's filling out the form, to just be, it's front and center exactly what they're filling out the form for. And then I've also put the link in here. This isn't a clickable link, so there is a little bit of work that's involved that they need to copy this and paste it into the browser, but I do put the link there, so then people do have a little bit of encouragement to at least try and listen to some podcast episodes of mine before they come on the show. And that is something that I know that this training is about getting guests on your show, but if you are ever going on somebody else's show, I would so recommend just listening to one or two episodes before you go on to somebody else's show, just to get an idea of the format and what have you. All I can say is it is so obvious when guests come onto your show and they've never ever listened to one of your episodes, but that's a little bit of an aside. So the first thing I ask for is their name. I then get them to write in their organisation, because remembering that some people will not have an organisation which is like immediately and noticeable or attributed to their name. So get them to write in their organisation, an email, and by the way, the little stars here, these are just, they mean that they're required. So email, because I want to be able to contact them for sending them through the promo materials. I ask what time zone they are in as well. This just comes with just a bit of courtesy sometimes. It goes back to when I didn't have this exact format all worked out, and we did the form first and then it was, oh well, what works for you and stuff. But also I still like to keep this question in. I have a lot of my guests come on from America and Canada as well, so I just like to be courteous, to be able to say good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and it's actually the right time zone for them that I'm talking in. So that's one of the reasons why I do it. But also, if they come back to me and they say, actually, none of the dates in your diary or none of the times in your diary are working, then I can have a little look at this. I can say, okay, well, fill out the form anyway. I can look here. I can see which time zone they're in, and then I can make suggestions based on the time zone that they're actually in, because obviously I'm not going to suggest the same times when I'm available to somebody who I'm interviewing in Australia versus Canada for very obvious reasons. So I do like to keep this bit in. I then ask for their website and any social links that they would like included in the show notes. So the other thing that I say people can put in here as well is if they've got like a freebie or a download or something, just somewhere where they want to send people at the end of their episode. Now, people will change these, and what I mean by change these is during the course of an episode, it might kind of float into conversation that they have a particular freebie or a particular resource that they haven't put in here, and that's fine. You can add those links in afterwards or get them to send those links afterwards, but this is just a really good way of starting out. Like I said, I ask for their website, I ask for their social links. What I do with that is I then kind of stalk them a little bit on their website. I would say stalk, it's more research, so that I know what I'm talking about when they come onto the podcast. I've done my research, and it just makes people feel a little bit more relaxed, and I'm not going to be throwing any surprises if they start talking about services that I didn't even realise that they had, because I've already researched them beforehand. The other thing I like to do with the social links is I check out the social links and I will follow and connect with them on social media as well, because I just think that is lovely. And also, when you come to promoting the episode, it's easier to tag people in on certain social media platforms if you were already connected or friends with them. I then ask people, how would you like me to introduce you on the podcast? For example, your name, profession, background experience, basically whatever they want me to say. Now, some people will just write a sentence in here, such as, I'm Verity, founder of Verity Song On, and I'm a podcast manager. Other people will write a good 3-4 paragraphs. So you might then need to go back to them and say, look, I won't be reading all of that out. I will be breaking it down. And some people will write in just something along the lines of, it's fine, I can introduce myself. But I still like to just be geared up with, how would you like me to introduce you on the podcast? I just think it's a little bit of it makes your life a little bit easier, and it also just gives your guest that um, that control over how you're going to introduce them there. Um, I ask for them to upload a headshot or an image of themselves that they would like that I can include on the promo materials. And I also say here that you have the rights to share with me, because it's remembering that some people, if they have, photographs or images taken from like a previous workplace, they might not have the rights to share those, and then I use them. So, they need to have the rights to share their image with me, and I can then include them in the promo materials. If they have any issues, because this is a Google form, so you do need to upload using your Google account. So I do also say that if you've got any issues uploading it, then here is my email address. You can just send it straight to me. And if you really don't want to send me a headshot, that's absolutely fine. I can create graphics without it. But this is really, really important for getting the graphics. Are there any topics that you would like me to include or work into our conversation? Now, normally I approach guests or potential guests because they have a certain expertise, and I will approach them saying, I love that you talk about this. Can we talk about it on the podcast? So normally they will come back with something along the lines of what we discussed on Instagram DMs or what we discussed on LinkedIn, whatever. But I still think it's courteous to say to people, what is it that you are an expert on, or is there anything else that you would like to include in the show? And equally, is there anything you don't want to talk about? So, for example, they might have teased on social media that they've got a new masterclass coming up, but then they turn around and say, I don't want to talk about that masterclass in the podcast at all because I've changed my mind, it's not coming out, or it's not launching on that date, or can you not talk about this because it's quite triggering for me at the moment? You get my point. I think it is quite important to say, if there's anything that you don't want to talk about, and that's absolutely fine. Then the final thing, and this is probably the most important part of the form, I'm going to include the link within this lesson as to where I got this statement from, because I did not come up with it myself. I did get it from a template. It's absolutely free, but credit where credit's due. I'm going to put the link in this lesson exactly where I got this form, or this statement, I should say, for the form. But essentially, what I am saying is that on signing this, I have the rights to the podcast and the recordings, and I can do essentially not what I want. That sounds a little bit blasé, but it is up to me as to how I will share my podcast and share the media that has been produced through guests coming onto my podcast. And I'm saying that I own the property and I own the rights of those recordings, wherever they decide to be published. That is really, really useful and important, because what you don't want as a podcast host is somebody to turn around to you in like 6 months, a year's time and say, oh, I want you to take that podcast down. That's, I don't give permission for my podcast, for my voice to be on your podcast and all this kind of thing. You can say, no, actually, you've signed to say that this is my recording now. The other thing that is included here is that you're saying that you do not pay people to come onto your podcast. That's really important. It is kind of, a given in the industry that the vast majority of people do not get paid and do not pay to go on podcasts. However, it is really important that you have that somewhere so that somebody can't turn around to you and go, oh, well, I gave you an hour's worth of my time. I normally charge X amount for an hour's worth of my time, so I want to be reimbursed for that. They've signed saying that they will not receive monetary compensation there. And then there's a couple of other bits as well, also around releasing me from any liability for anything said and done within the podcast there on their behalf. I then ask them to just tick here, I understand and agree with the above statements. Now, if anybody is in the legal circle, no, yes, you can argue this is not legally binding. It is a tick box. However, I do think that, it's not about creating something that's completely legally binding. It's about creating an agreement and making sure that everybody knows exactly where they stand and what is expected of both parties there. And you can add other things in here as well. You can add things like you expect the guest to promote on their social media platforms at least once the episode comes out, for example. I've seen different things like that go in as well, but it's completely up to you as to what you want to include in there. And then I also just get them to put the date in there as well. So that's my form, and then when it's completed I get a notification, and then I'll go through responses. From a GDPR and data protection point of view, I'm not going to show you my responses at the moment, but the responses all go in there. And then I can also change things around in the settings. But as I said, I'm going to show you that in the other video when I show you how to set up your guest form. So before we jump into doing the guest form and setting up, I hope that was really useful, just so that you can see how my podcast guest form is set up, and hopefully it'll start giving you some ideas as to how you are going to create your own there.